They weren't just pilots, in other words. They had to have the right stuff, whatever that fancy term means. And
also,
so,
a very famous, sorry to interrupt you there, Mr. Friedman, there is a famous piece of footage of the lunar orbiter, I believe it is, filming down on the lunar lander that's now coming back to the lunar orbiter. And where the lunar is moving sort of towards the orbiter, a little ball sort of whooshes past. And it's very clear, it's a distinctive piece of footage, and no one really picked up on it, although it's quite familiar to UFO investigators to see that little ball fly past the lunar lander there as it's on its way back up towards the orbiter. Do you recall that piece of footage?
No, I don't, unfortunately. Sorry. I wish I did.
No problem.
I'll take your word for it, but I don't recall it. Look, there's no question that NASA does classified work. I had somebody tell me, well, they're a civilian agency. I work for civilian companies. We did classified work. Let me recite. The biggest program I worked on was the aircraft nuclear propulsion program of the General Electric Company back in 1958, mind you. And it was a pretty good-sized program. We spent $100 million that year. We employed 3,500 people full-time, of whom 1,100 were engineers and scientists. So these weren't small programs. We never did fly a nuclear-powered airplane. But I'm saying partly because of the Cold War, anything that would give us a leg up on the Russians, because a nuclear-powered airplane would have unlimited range. Replace the cruise, every few thousand hours or something, but the plane itself. Well, you can see that for people who look at me like, what are you talking about, unlimited range? You realize the Navy has not only submarines that can go around the world underwater without coming to the surface, which means it's very hard to find them, but it also has aircraft carriers that can operate for 18 years without refueling, nuclear-powered ones. Think about that for a minute. 18 years without going to the gas station. That's a remarkable achievement. And there's several of them.
And you did this all in secrecy, and that just goes to prove our point that we talked about at the beginning of the hour, that government keeps secrets. You were working on classified projects that were not known to the general public, maybe known to spies.
It wasn't a black project. It said aircraft nuclear propulsion program at the door. The data was all classified.
Going back...
nuclear rocket engines. We tested a couple fission rockets. Then the program was canceled. Like success to kill a program.
I remember the factories. I think it was Burbank, California, and you was mentioning earlier that they were using plutonium, and so there was an enrichment program or a place in California where they were doing all of this plutonium-based stuff, and they used to have a sign on the wall all over the place, in all the workshops, and it would say, "Loose lips sink ships," and that's all it said.
Yeah, that's an old line. I remember it from World War II.
About keeping your mouth shut, keeping your secrets. Going back to something we started initially, the congressional hearings, all these people that were there, Carl Sagan, your classmate. Now, you said you didn't know each other in high school. I'm assuming because you were in the same university and you were in the same classes, you befriended each other at the time?
At Chicago? Sure, yes.
Now,
we were in the same classes, a small group of us, maybe 24 or so, and we didn't take a lot of classes. Chicago didn't want their professors to work too hard. They had to do research, not teach. And so we saw each other a lot.
Did he ever disclose to you that he wished to be buried in space?
Not at that time, that's for sure. Who was talking about space? This was 1950... 3, 4, 5, and 6, let's say.
Now, wasn't it around the time that you bought that the way you came into ufology is the story you told us a while ago. Essentially, you were buying books, and you needed one more to get that free shipping, and that ended up being, if I'm not mistaken...
That was in 1958.
Okay, so it was post-meeting Sagan.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Did you ever confront Sagan after that period and tell him what you've uncovered and then the research you started doing? I mean, when did you guys start butting heads? Because I was always wondering if he was partially in the know, kind of like Menzel, and just used SETI as a cover, or was he just really that ignorant?
I can't tell you. I saw him a year before he died. I was at his home, and at least 10 years before that, I had spoken at Cornell and saw him then. We were not butting heads, but in my last visit, we had a long discussion, and I sent him a letter afterward. He sent me a letter. He sent me a copy of the article that he published in Parade magazine, and I sent a critique of it. But we were, look, you don't have to be disagreeable just because you disagree. You know, we were the same age. I'm 4 months older than he is, but that's pretty close.
Yes.
And we talked around security a little bit. I knew he had a security clearance when he was on the O'Brien panel. And let me surprise you. I think if anybody took Menzel's place, it was more likely to be Frank Drake. And why do I say that? Because Drake got his degree in electrical engineering, went into the Navy, and worked on code communication systems, worrying about the other guy's communications capabilities, Russians and so forth. He had to have a high-level security clearance to do that. You know, you can't figure out how to counteract the other guy's communication systems, a jam or whatever else, unless you know something about it. When he came out, he went to Harvard and joined in the reserve, the Naval Reserve Communications Unit number 1 under Donald Menzel. And he stayed in the reserve for 10 years after getting his PhD, first PhD in, you know, radio astronomy kind of thing. And the interesting thing was that he worked all the summers. And the Navy loves to get guys, really sharp guys like Frank, but they don't have to hire them, you know, only work the summer kind of thing, reservist kind of status. So Frank would be my first choice. And I've never confronted him. I haven't met him. It would be interesting to do that. He's even older than I am, I think. A bit older than I am. But, and you know, SETI is a strange beast. People say, well, why do you say SETI stands for silly effort to investigate? Because it's based on crazy premises, silly premises. Aliens are stuck at our level of technology. We had our first long-distance radio signal in 1901. And so, you know, nobody's ahead of us. Nobody's developed anything better. But any look at the history of technology in any area shows that progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. The future's not an extrapolation of the past. I mean, just because it took Magellan's ship almost 3 years to go around the planet doesn't mean we're still using sailboats. The space station does it in 90 minutes.
There was a crop circle in England back in about 10 years ago. Rather than your normal circle, this was a particular face, what looked like a Zeta Rectili Grey. And it had a disc sort of in the same picture. And the disc was decoded as a binary code. And it was decoded as a small warning. It also gave coordinates. I was thinking, like, if aliens are going to be coming here, they're going to be super intelligent and they're going to be, you know, above our level of communication understanding. But I think that because we are what we are, it's fair to say that it's possible that they can come down a tech level and come down to our level, you know, and communicate. Would that not be a fair premise?
Well, of course. You know, I don't know how much more intelligent they are. They wouldn't have to be much more to be way beyond us. But remember, I don't think we're any more intelligent than the Greeks were. We certainly have technology they didn't have. We've had the benefit of more years of development now than they did, and solid background. On the other hand, I'd like to suggest to people, maybe this is the jail that they send people to. You know, we're a cosmic kindergarten that they've sent. Well, look, I've been to Australia. They take great pride in their convict ancestors. Remember the English sent their prisoners out of jails to Australia?
Off to Botany Bay.
Well, and they're proud of it. I don't know why. Georgia had a lot of convicts too, but they weren't proud of it.
Well, you could go for stealing a bottle of milk or, something very petty. You would be sent off. But I think, in them days, what they were looking to do was colonize. And if they could take the poor or, the less disenfranchised, then they would do that. And that's basically what happened. So, yeah, Australia was founded on that.
Well, I worried about English because we have a bunch of professors around here in New Brunswick, and they left when you guys had a brain drain, remember, and you raised the taxes, so we got a lot of professors from over there. But when I went to England, I thought, great place. I had the same problem with Germany. I didn't really want to spend any time in Germany, but I was taking a train and got off in Black Forest because I had an extra day going up from Italy to the Netherlands. And the people were so nice. How could I keep feeling angry when they treated me very specially? Like a human being, believe it or not.
The new generation, I think, definitely feels regret for what their ancestors did. At least that's the impression I got. I haven't been there, but just seeing documentaries on how the young generation is coping with the fact that they have to deal with their ancestors being Nazis.
Yeah, the world has certainly learned a few things, and it's like segregation in the States. I can remember being shocked when I first visited the Atlanta airport back in the 50s. Blacks only, whites only on restrooms and stuff like that. And things have gotten better. They're not perfect. But people can learn as a society. And the places where it worked best, desegregation, was when they did it one grade at a time in the schools. And when the leadership said, we're a law-abiding people and we will abide. And so this year it's first graders, next year it's first and second graders, and so forth. And people can adapt. People can change their habits. President Truman desegregated the Army. There were people who weren't very happy about that, to say the least. But they adapted.
I bet they were happy when they were saved on the battlefields by someone else that wasn't their race. I bet that's when they probably realized that
I'd like to think that the Palestinian people, the Semitic people of that region, can learn as well that from the war. Because at the moment it's not looking that way, and I really hope that they come around to a better understanding of worldview.
It's funny. Arabs and Jews are both Semites, and they had their best success for both of them back in the 12th, 13th century in Spain. And then, of course, the church came along, and Jews were kicked out of Spain in 1492, the year that Columbus discovered America. So it wasn't the Arabs who did them dirt, but you realize that hate has been the tool of politicians for a very long time. And, we're better than those guys. And, kill them, not us. Defend us against those terrible people. And same thing happens in many different countries, doesn't it? Find somebody to hate. Look what's happening in Africa. It's terrible.
And sadly, I see it getting worse. And our government, the American government, the agencies, the intelligence agencies, don't really help it that much when they go to different regions of the world and fund arms to both sides, as if they want the conflicts to happen. It's almost as if they don't care who wins. It really always shocks me when I hear about that.
Can you imagine what they teach them in alien universities about what's happening on planet Earth?
I couldn't imagine. I could not imagine. That's probably why we're being visited and observed right now, because we're at a critical point. And a lot of people seem to forget that this is not only the planet for humans. This planet hosts so many different species that if we don't take care of it and we destroy it, we're going to destroy the homes of countless species that would have no means of survival. They don't have the intelligence to pick themselves up and colonize themselves on another planet. What would the sharks do? What would the whales do? What would the chimps do? And I think that's one thing that we can always speculate on this about the ETs. I'm going to go back now to politicians, and I'm hoping maybe you could, this is again only pure speculation. So we know that through documents and that things that you were able to at least verify with that Twining memo that referenced MJ-12, and then, of course, the actual MJ-12 briefing document that went to Eisenhower from Truman. If Truman founded MJ-12 and referenced in there Roswell, and we know now, I've heard you speak about the Cape Girardeau incident from Missouri 1941, why wasn't FDR so into this UFO, I don't want to say problem, but UFO thing? Crisis is not the right word either, but UFO, I guess, issue versus Truman. Why didn't FDR set up anything? Was he just so engulfed in what was happening on our planet that he didn't see what was happening with visitors?
Well, I think so. Remember, we take it for granted, Americans do, many of them, that, we won the war, of course we're going to win the war, and so forth. That wasn't a certainty at all. The Germans were beating the heck out of us in the Atlantic. The Japanese were charging through the Pacific. You remember how the French got pushed, the Maginot Line collapsed.
Yeah.
Thank goodness for all those small fishing boats at Dunkirk to carry away the troops. So I think the immediate problem was, we've got a war going on two different fronts. And again, if the Brits hadn't done so well on breaking the codes, and the Americans then broke the Japanese codes, people forget how much difference it makes if you know what your enemy is doing, where he's flying, where his ships are sailing, where his submarines are. It doesn't give you another bomb or another gun, another fighter plane, but that knowledge coming from the code breaking, which was not played up during the war at all, obviously, was extraordinarily important. It wasn't because the Germans were ahead of us in technology, partly because the Brits wouldn't back new technology. A British guy invented a jet engine before the Germans did. Got no backing from the government. So the Germans flew the first jets. And so leadership is not always long-sighted. I think often they're short-sighted, if you will.
Well, while we're talking about the Germans building, these technologies, there's a UFO going around called the Hanabu 1 and a Hanabu 2, and they're supposedly Vril engines run off BMW engines, apparently. And I wondered if you are conscious of this, or if you ever heard about it.
Well, I've heard a lot of, there's a guy named Joseph Farrell, who's written several books touting the Nazi saucers and technology and so forth. And I don't buy it for this reason. If the Germans had developed, call them saucers, if you will, whatever you want to call them, why didn't they use them? Now, I'm not saying there weren't things on the drawing board. When I worked in industry, we often put together beautiful proposals with lovely drawings of what this great new technology we wanted to bid on and get the contract for would look like. We hadn't built it. We hadn't flown it. But here's an artist's concept. And there certainly were good German artist concepts about advanced propulsion. I mean, let's face it. Everybody realizes, wouldn't it be great if we had a craft that could move forward and backward and up and down and make right-angle turns and do it silently without any visible external engines?
Sounds like a Willy Wonka lift. Elevator.
It would be incredible. Everybody knows. And also, important thing, it could land and take off from a space not much bigger than itself. An airfield's a tremendous waste of space for a little airplane, certainly for a little saucer. So there's no question that people had in their mind, wouldn't it be great if we could build something that looked like this? But remember, the Horton brothers' planes were made out of wood, mostly. It's tough. You don't see them very easily on radar.
The Wright brothers, you mean? Or the Horton?
No, the Horton brothers, the German Horton brothers during the war. Some people have said saucers were built by the Horton brothers, German engineers. No. The Horton brothers were good designers, and they did build things. but they certainly didn't successfully build a flying saucer. That is, one with the flying saucer flight capabilities. Anybody can build something that looks like that. That's easy.
The
They can
Avro
fly
car.
like that.
Yeah, like the Avro
Well-
car. Right? That was something that looked like it, but it sure as heck didn't fly like it.
Well, that's the point. It's the flying that matters. And so, we've come a long way. We start with birds, and we go to the Wright Brothers planes, and we go to bigger airplanes, and we're still talking wings and all that stuff. And now we're getting into, what do you call these planes that are drones?
Unmanned, yeah, drones.
Yeah, unmanned. So the man is the limiting factor, usually. Airplanes can stand a lot more G's than people can for any length of time, So now we may be getting some really weird-looking craft, and some of the drones do look weird, but that's the future, and that's not now, and it certainly isn't the way things were back in the 40s. I insist that if the Germans could have built flying saucers, they would have. I mean, you can't say, well, Hitler was a nice guy. He didn't want to hurt anybody. Come on.
That's all he did.
Yeah. So,
do you know anything about the F-19 stealth plane?
no.
Because I saw some pictures of it the other day. You just type Google F-19, and up comes these pictures. And surrounding next to it was this sort of the shape of the wings, how they sort of fold up and round. It reminded me, and I asked another gentleman the other day on the show, do you think there's any resemblance from the technologies of the aircraft we have today from the early craft that was sort of resembled the original Roswell craft crash, where people have given their drawings of it, of what they said it looked like? I found it very similar to this F-19 craft, but obviously if you haven't seen it...
I'm not saying we haven't learned anything from flying saucers, but it isn't easy for a slow civilization to build something that came from a fast civilization, if you will. Look, I got a cheap wristwatch here, a digital wristwatch, $25, something like that. If I had given that to the smartest people on the planet in 1934, they would have known it kept time, and they could see there's a battery in there, but they couldn't analyze the chip. They certainly couldn't duplicate the chip. So, if you'd given Columbus a nuclear submarine and say, hey, Chris, I got a lot of money here. I need 2 more of these. Could he have built one? Not a chance. No way. So I think we've learned a lot from recovered crashed vehicles. I still get a kick out of it. In my book, Flying Saucers and Science, there's a picture of me with my hand on the Apollo 12 command module at the manufacturers in Southern California. It had been in space, came back, and I think got it there, North America. And what's crazy about that is it's a round vehicle. You want a high-speed vehicle in the atmosphere was always the notion. You got to have a pointy nose, sharp wing, highly streamlined, right? Like the X-15 or something. But no, it isn't like that at all. But then it turns out at Wright Field in Ohio, they ran wind tunnel tests on round craft in the late 1947. In other words, I think somebody might have just recognized, hey, these guys are going awfully fast. Why don't we try something like that shape, see how it works? And the Apollo command module, round blunt body, worked, And there's another example, which I get a kick out of. I used to use it without knowing how appropriate it was. If you got a bunch of wreckage, and that's what there was in Roswell, there wasn't any intact saucer, a huge debris field, small pieces of stuff, foil-like material especially. And you'd send it out to your best classified labs, and you'd ask, what is this stuff? You don't tell him where you got it. He doesn't have a need to know for that. He's got to have a clearance so that he doesn't tell anybody what he finds. But and he comes back and says, I don't know where you got this stuff, but it's a combination of samarium and cobalt, 2 elements. Why would anybody put those together? That's not your problem, sir. You go to other people and say, let's measure the electrical, magnetic, thermal properties of this material. And the guy comes back and says, look, I don't know where you got this, but I measured the highest magnetic moment from any material I've ever measured. Where'd you get it? None of your business. You don't ever need to know. And from that point on, we built with ghetto blasters with magnets made with samarium and cobalt. So you've learned something. You know how to fly the vehicle, but you've got a new material. Well, I used to use it as an example until I did a weekly science commentary on a radio station here in Fredericton for 6 years back in the 80s. And I was reading an article about new and better permanent magnet materials. Neodymium, that's a real material. I've heard. Neodymium, boron, and iron. And at the end of the article, it said the original work on samarium cobalt was done at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Wright Air Development Center at Wright-Pat. And I just laughed my head off, but I know where they got that idea from. You learn. During the war, there were Brits who spent time examining crashed German airplanes to try to back-engineer them. What can we learn from this plane that would help us? And the Germans did the same thing with crashed American or British planes. Standard practice. It's incremental, but it can be a help. You might find, hey, there's some titanium here. Why would you use that? Oh, then you run your lab tests, and I can see why they'd use that. The nuclear navy, the primary material, construction material for the reactors and so forth, is zirconium. Nobody ever made anything out of zirconium. They had to develop a whole new industry. Well, it's got the right combination of nuclear properties and high temperature strength and all that sort of thing. Had to develop a whole new industry. Uranium. What did anybody use that for? To make yellow coloring matter for tableware. That's illegal now, but 100 years ago, that's what we used uranium for. And counterweights when we started building airplanes, because it's very dense material, almost twice as dense as lead. So we've got a lot to learn yet. Anybody who thinks we know it all, just wait a while.
Well, some people say that it's all very well gaining these technologies over the last 50 years, say, but it's actually come at a great expense, and for a lot of people, abductees, experiences as they're known, they believe that there's been a program from Eisenhower's day that allows a trade-off, an abduction of human beings for experiments or whatever, for a hybrid program, and in return, they get technologies. And so, have you ever found this to be the case in your
I've heard
studies?
I've heard that idea. Made a bargain with the devil, so to speak. And I have no reason to believe it's true or to believe it isn't true. It's in my gray basket, maybe.
Was it not true? In the Project Blue Book, there was a discussion where President Truman acknowledges that there's these little green men or whatever they said, these discs. We're doing an investigation into it. And then one of the gentlemen that was part of I believe the Majestic 12 members of that Blue Book meeting, one said that there's a 57, like the Heinz 57 variety. And he brought pictures of the hands and the skin. The skin was discussed.
I really don't. I haven't seen any. There's more stories than you can shake a stick at out there.
Sure.
So I think, remember, people have been writing science fiction for well over 100 years, and some of it's pretty darn good and believable.
Yeah, H.G. Wells.
It's realistic. Yeah, he mentioned a nuclear bomb in the early teens, I guess, the 19th teens.
Visionary.
Yeah. There were visionaries around. He wasn't the only one, but certainly he was one of the cleverest. And so there are all kinds of possibilities here. And so writers have come up with great ideas. And I'm not going to say they haven't. But until I see evidence for certain steps, I can't say I believe that that's the truth. I'm not saying somebody's lying. I'm saying I haven't seen the evidence that it's the truth. I've heard the story about the hybrids, and look, it's like, why are aliens coming here? I think I give 20 reasons in my book, Flying Saucers in Science. From the sublime to the ridiculous. Radio broadcasters of a weekly show, Idiocy in the Boondocks. You guys know about that stuff.
That's right. Like you said, there's more stories than we could shake our stick at. And in some ways, it's worse because they're muddying the waters. And I almost want to wonder, it makes me wonder if the CIA or other intelligence agencies such as the NSA are perpetuating these lies just on purpose to throw more mud in the water to make it more difficult for researchers such as yourself and everybody out there who take this seriously.
Well, to confuse the other countries, too. That's usually the goal. And incidentally, if you want a nice ballpark figure, the Washington Post said the black budget for military intelligence a year ago was $52.6 billion. And that's mostly NSA, CIA, and NRO, National Reconnaissance Office. Now, that's a lot of money.
Yes, that's a ridiculous amount of money. That's enough money to run small countries for a long period of time.
Of course. So you don't know what's going on or why they're doing it. And what scares me, frankly, and for my great-grandson, is that the military budget this year is $1 trillion on planet Earth.
That's astounding number.
Yes, it is. It's a ridiculous number. Think how many kids we could feed with that. So we haven't gotten out of our habit of my gun is bigger than your gun kind of thing. And that scares me, especially, I mean, what if Iran develops nuclear bombs? Would they hesitate to use them?
I don't think so. Exactly. You just said the word that I said. I don't think they would. Going back to the history, I know we've talked about this on another show when we were asking about the conferences that you went at, the largest, the smallest, the most memorable ones. And one that you mentioned was the Saudi Arabia one. And I think it was two separate times, one where Bill Gates was present and another where Bill Clinton was present.
No, there were 5 of them. I was only at the 5th one. There's been another one since.
But you met Bill Gates and Bill Clinton. Am I correct?
No, Gates was at the first one, and I wasn't there. I was only at the 5th one, and Clinton was there, but there were people around him. I was one of the speakers, but he wasn't there when we were speaking. Nick Pope of England, Jacques Vallée, Michio Kaku, and an Egyptian whose name I can't recall because I couldn't pronounce it at the time.
Azawiz?
I'm not sure.
He's the antiquities gent.
No, it's
but
in antiquities. But and that was an interesting meeting. Here I am, and I was worried a little bit. I sent them an email well in advance saying, my friends and relatives are saying, "What are you, crazy? You're Jewish? You're going to Saudi Arabia?" And so I wrote them and said, I don't want to go all that long way, and it is a long way from here, and tell me that I can't get off the plane. Am I in trouble? Is there a problem? No, we have had Jewish speakers before, no problem at all, and they were absolutely right. There wasn't any problem at all. There was security around the place, but I enjoyed the meeting. People paid $1,000 to attend. They had presidents of corporations and chief pilots for airlines and stuff like that there. And it was interesting because we were treated well and because there's a lot of interest in what we were saying. The speakers, there were only 5 of us. And I stressed that we could learn because progress comes from doing things differently. And obviously the aliens have established some means of doing things that we don't yet have, then here's an opportunity to learn some more, new and better and so forth. And I was very well received. We ate lunch and dinners were informal. I mean, you could sit where you please. You didn't have name tags on the places and stuff like that. So I got to meet a lot of people, and it was like being at a cousin's club. They were friendly people, and there was no ridicule for flying saucers.
Well, Bill Clinton being present at that one, and then in the past, Bill Gates being present at that one, shows to me, just by looking at it on its face, that clearly that they are interested in this topic. And then you have Hillary Clinton photographed with Lawrence Rockefeller holding a book on UFOs. And then even recently, in I think it was March 2014, Jimmy Kimmel had Bill Clinton on his show, and of course UFOs was brought up. So the fact that he's diving into this makes me wonder, does he know and he's just publicly diving into it to let us know that he's interested, or is he truly kept out of the loop? But regardless,
I don't know. I will say one thing. In his speech there, he did mention the Kepler results. A new view, that there seem to be planets all over the place. And Clinton did mention that.
How about Michio Kaku? Because obviously he seems to be talking about things as if kind of like where Carl Sagan left off, theoretically, that we can be visited, but he's more focused on the fact that we can't get there, so they can't get here still.
Well, I've been on his program, and of course I met him there in Saudi Arabia as well. He used to do a radio program. I don't know if he still does or not. And one problem I have with him and all astronomers, he was talking about, he had thought about going to the stars, and when he realized how far away Andromeda was and how much energy it would take, that seemed not very possible. Well, I don't care about Andromeda. It's 2 million light years away. I care about Zeta Reticuli, 39 light years away. Enormous difference. And I find that most astronomers pay no attention to the fact that there are over 2,000 stars within 50 light years of here. Forget about Andromeda. Who cares? And now, of course, with Kepler, we know there's a lot of planets around, too. But and I find that astronomers know nothing about advanced propulsion systems. It's not part of their game plan and what's going on in the world. Astronomy has a long history of jumping to conclusions. Back in the 19th century, we knew that we would never know the composition of the stars. Then, of course, spectroscopes were developed. In 1903, October, Simon Newcomb, top astronomer in the United States, he was so important when he died a few years later, his funeral was attended by the president. Simon Newcomb said that if there was one thing he was certain of, men would never fly in a vehicle. That was 2 months before the Wright brothers' first flight. A couple of your British astronomer royals have said some really dumb things, if you don't mind my saying so. In 1956, space travel is utter bilge. Why would anybody spend the money? What we need is better instruments for astronomy. And, of course, the field that's benefited the most from the space program has been astronomy. Not just Kepler, but all the other satellites and Hubble and all that sort of stuff. Now, I guess it was a little over a year ago, the British Astronomer Royal said, only kooks see UFOs. An utterly stupid statement, not supported by any evidence, of course, any indication that he'd read any of the literature. Plenty of astronomers have seen UFOs.
Astronauts, too. Presidents.
Well, yeah. Yeah, so, Reagan, I've talked to his pilot when he was governor of California, and they had a good sighting where everybody on the plane saw it. It wasn't a commercial plane, it was the governor's plane, as it happens. And the pilot had 30,000 hours, which is, oh boy, that's a lot of flying hours. That's an experienced pilot, to say the least. So, lots of people have had sightings, and
Israel say about UFOs as a nation?
Say that again?
Israel as a nation feel about UFOs? Are they like America where they don't acknowledge it? Or is there, I know there's a UFO community there. There's been sightings quite recently, in fact, in Jerusalem on the Mount Horeb. But I just wondered, as a nation, do they have a stance on it? Because one expects...
Not that I know of. I've spoken there, as a matter of fact. Before I spoke in Saudi Arabia, as a matter of fact, years before. But you got to keep both sides happy, I think that they have the good sense not to discuss things openly any more than the United States Air Force does, or the Navy. The people have gotten away with bloody murder in terms of not disclosing what they know is the United States Navy. Well, Office of Naval Intelligence was the leading intelligence agency, certainly before the Air Force and the Army. Let me just say that I tried to get information about Navy sightings. Oh, we don't have any, said the office that should have had it. So I sent him a copy of a joint report by Army Air Force Intelligence and Naval Intelligence. Thank you for the interesting report, but as I told you, we don't have anything. Now, I've talked to many former Navy people who've had sightings out on the ocean. You're telling me they have nothing? Come on. That's ridiculous.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we've too have had Navy men on this from several different ranks that spoke about sightings they had whether on board submarines or giant ships or you name it. But I was going to go back to the lectures at different countries. What countries that you've been to, that you've lectured in, actually showed the least resistance, meaning that the governments were more receptive and open to this, meaning to me...
I didn't talk to governments. I didn't talk to
the people.
I talked to the...
Yeah.
Well, I've had no resistance anywhere. I've spoken in Australia, and I've spoken in England, and China, and Korea, and Brazil, and Argentina, and
England, and I'm sure in Australia they ridicule when you talk about UFOs. You know, they really don't believe this thing. The media is set in a way that it poo-poos it. You know, it doesn't give you credence.
Well,
it may to your face, but then once it's edited and mastered its copy and it goes out on British television, you know, it makes us all look like tin pot hats. And I know that's not the case. I know people are serious. They've got years of indulgence.
I did a debate at Oxford University Debating Society. My cohort was an attorney, Harry Harris. And believe it or not, and I found, I did 7 talks for that couple-of-week period in England, and I found the media people didn't know much at all, judging by their questions. But at the debate, I got 60% of the vote, my team did. Much to a lot of people's surprise, I guess. So the media were not cognizant of the problem at all. So I haven't found, I don't care what the media, I mean, it'd be nice if they covered me fairly, but I care about my audiences. And I find that everywhere I go, there is great interest. There may be ignorance to begin with, but that's what I'm there for, to educate them. No eggs thrown at me yet.
Well, you don't deserve them, because you've always been the godfather of ufology. You speak with facts. When you say something of speculation, you make it very clear. So I would think, obviously, everybody would be extremely receptive to what you say, because you stand above other researchers in that realm. Absolutely, in my mind.
Well, thank you. I had a good response in Poland, for example. What can I say?
Let me go back to
San Marino.
since we're nearing, we got under 20 minutes left. I just want to give you the heads up. Since we're to the end of the show, I want to go back to your history a little bit. Prior to you uncovering Jesse Marcel Sr. and exposing Roswell, what was at the time the biggest cases you were dealing with? What were you lecturing about then?
Well, I spent a lot of time talking about 5 large-scale scientific studies. And I know from asking my audiences that fewer than 2% of the people have read any of them. So Project Blue Book Special Report 14 is one of my favorite topics. It involved 3,201 sightings, study done for the Air Force, mind you. And fortunately, not only did they find 21.5% unknowns, and the better the quality, the more likely to be an unknown, and the probability that the unknowns were just misknowns was less than 1%. But it also demonstrated a lie from the government, the Secretary of the Air Force. I showed them the quote from him. He said, on the basis of this study, we believe that no objects such as those properly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. Even the unknown 3% could have been identified as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been available. I show that quote, and then I show the data from the report. The unknowns weren't 3%, they were 21.5%, and there was a separate category, insufficient information, 9.3%. And I go on about that. And I do ask how many people have read this, and practically none. And I tell them about the congressional hearings and the data that from a bunch of scientists, 12 scientists. And they hadn't been aware of that. I tell them about Dr. Hynek's book. Everybody knew about Hynek from swamp gas and all that stuff, but they didn't realize that he had more than 70 cases that couldn't be explained in his book. I tell them about Dick Hall's book, The UFO Evidence, data on a couple of thousand cases, and, they're shocked. And I tell them about the Condon report. Everybody was under the impression, because that's the way the media played it, that Condon showed that there was nothing to flying saucers. But a special UFO subcommittee of the world's largest group of space scientists, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, which wouldn't let me on the committee, although I'm a member, and I've been studying the phenomena for 11 years, but I had reached a conclusion already. Anyway, their special UFO committee found that one could come to the opposite conclusions from Dr. Condon's, and that any phenomena with such a high percentage of unknowns, 30% of the 117 cases studied, could not be explained, is worthy of further scientific investigation. So I
do you think there's a possibility, Mr. Friedman, that in the future that the understandings that we're going to need to evolve from this as conscious human beings will be more about consciousness, more about its spiritual consciousness in a sense, or even if without the spiritual side, just consciousness. When people are informed and have a conscious decision with good information, they can make, great decisions. But if they're ill-informed or denied information, then, you're going to make a bad judgment, just somewhere down the line.
I think you're right. I think that's true. On the other hand, I'm hoping that by educating them, people will move in the right direction. And, these are interesting times. Where do we go from here in the world? Things are a mess right now, I'd say, around the planet. But who speaks for planet Earth? And I was shocked when the Pope, was it 3-4 years ago, said there's no reason to say that God didn't make our brethren in outer space just as he made us. And my first thought was, who's he been talking to? Yeah. So,
the statement in the Bible that mentions that I made the Pleiades and the Orions is a statement, I believe, that was proclaiming that God said that the Orions and the Pleiades were something that he'd built and not to wonder about them. I know it's somewhere in the book.
Well, I don't want anybody to tell me not to wonder about anything, frankly, because I want to wonder about everything. But, no, I think consciousness is important, and I think we need to recognize that we're all in this together. And if there's one thing governments don't want, it's for people to owe their allegiance to the planet. Think about it. Nationalism's the only game in town.
Yes.
Isn't that true over there, just as it is over here?
This day, we're more inclined to Sharia law and to be open-minded and accept a synthesis of both the East and the West. So to say that nationalism is rife in England, no, I wouldn't say that at all.
Well, okay, who speaks for planet Earth? We're going to have an election, not with China having 1.3 billion people. We haven't figured out a way to get along with each other very well. That's why I mentioned the $1 trillion military budget this year. That tells you a lot. Starving kids, but $1 trillion on war? Military? There's something wrong with this planet. And I think the younger generation, I have a lot of hope for them. I see a lot of young people when I speak. And so, I'm an optimist. And remember, Max Planck, a great German physicist, said, new ideas come to be accepted, not because their opponents come to believe in them, but because their opponents die and a new generation grows up that's accustomed to them. Didn't say understands.
I remember George Bush, the son, the last president, saying, fool me once, shame on you, and then fool me twice, and then I thought to myself, am I hearing Jeb Bush applying for president? Didn't George Bush already make that fool me once statement? Are we going to go for another Bush madness?
I hope not.
Yeah, I hope not.
Look, the dumbest thing I've ever heard a president say, and because maybe I'm saying this only because I live in Canada and it's safe, is that we're going to make model democracy out of Iraq.
Yeah.
Now, any president could say that with no background in democracy in Iraq, and with tribal chieftains having, run the show for a very long time, democracy is hard work. It goes against the eye for an eye kind of principle. Me for mine and you for yours, and we'll fight about it when we get around to it. And so that one shocked me. So I'm not an admirer of the younger Bush. I couldn't imagine. How much did that Iraq war cost? And there weren't any weapons of mass destruction there?
Billions, I would say close to $1 trillion, if not more. And it's still ongoing in essence, even though we've essentially removed our troops. We still have the green zone, we still have the bases, and of course now we're bombing with our drones there, so it never really ended.
Well, that's right. It's scary to me. And so I think it may sound strange for me to say, but we could use another Eisenhower who had realized that war has its limitations. And that's why I mentioned that Operation Solarium. Because the reason he needed a new view is because he thought we were heading much too much in the direction of military stuff. And remember, he worried about the military...
industrial complex. Yes.
Yeah, military-industrial conference. But in that same speech, he worried about the scientists, too. And I can see why. The Ed Tellers of the world pushing for more bombs. The way to peace is not through more bombs, if you look at the bigger picture, at least in my view. And, of course, the aliens may be here for all kinds of other reasons that have nothing to do with what we've said so far. Maybe they're stealing our heavy metals. It's the densest planet in the solar system. And probably the people are too. But, a cubic foot of Earth weighs more than a cubic foot of any other planet. That means more uranium, osmium, platinum, those high-density materials, which are valuable and rare in the universe. We know that from studying the stars. Maybe they've been stealing diamonds from the bottom of the ocean. There's over 1,000 reports of, what's the fancy term, unidentified submerged objects.
That's right, USOs, yeah.
We are getting to the end of the time, and I just want to ask one last question to you, because I appreciate your time, and I'm glad that I can come directly to the horse's mouth and have this opportunity. So I thank both Dr. J and yourself, Mr. Friedman. My last question to you is not about intellectual questions, but what do you want to tell the children of the world for the future?
That we are not perfect. We are not the big shots in the neighborhood. We've got a lot to learn. And if we work at it together, I think we can manage that. We have the brains, we have the resources on the planet. It's the will to use them for the benefit of mankind that we need to learn. And that's going to be a chore. And I hope we make progress on it.
You gave an astonishing message. Let's tell everyone the website, first of all, www.stantonfriedman.com. All your books are available, where your lectures, your upcoming lectures, everything's available on there. I know you just gave the message for all the youngsters in the world, but I want to ask you something that correlates with that. This will be my final question / comment / whatever you want to say. You've lived through decades of turmoil, and you've seen ufology change for the better, meaning more openness, more information that we have, more tools that we have. Again, this will be more of your speculation, knowing that the transformation that you've seen in ufology, and knowing that the message that you just given for the children of the future, those who are more open-minded, what what can you see as far as transformation with ufology? Do you see it going at an exponential rate versus what you witnessed in the last 56, 57 years of research? Or do you think the children, such as your great-grandchild, great-grandson, is going to face the same turmoils, meaning the ridicule from the CIA, NSA, and the media, and all that, and to get to the same level you are 57 years later?
Well, I think the real problem isn't just the CIA and the NSA. They've got their job to do. They're trying to do it. I'm as much concerned about the ancient academics and fossilized physicists and journalists that aren't doing their job, who are misleading the public by putting out false nonsense. I mean, when an astronomer can say that the proof that the government can't keep secrets is how much we know about President Clinton's genitalia, and we know we're in trouble. That's not what astronomers should be saying. Or when the British Astronomer Royal says only kooks see UFOs. That's where your ridicule comes from. It's not the agencies. It's egotistical people who are arrogant. If there were anything to this, I would know about it, and I don't, so there must not be. That's not science. It's not even good religion. It's
tabloid media, unfortunately.
Yes. So I'm hoping that gradually, with the Kepler data permeating us all, that there will be some changes made. And, I'm pleased that there's a new pope who seems to be concerned about the people. And I think if that's the case, that we're in good shape if we move in the direction of understanding that truth is more important than arrogance, than ego. That's what I want to see take place. I gave a talk to a group of Canadian journalists, annual meeting or something, and I was told afterward by the guy who arranged it that he never saw so many newspaper guys change their mind in a hurry because they hadn't been aware of all the data. So I need to write another book. That's what I need to do.
You've got to show them the door and let them walk through it.
That's right. That's right.
Down the rabbit hutch.
Yes, down the rabbit hole. Well, Mr. Friedman, it has truly been an honor. One more time, everybody, www.StantonFriedman.com. And remember, this is the godfather of ufology. We would not be doing what we're doing right now, talking about such information, if it wasn't for the inspiration of this great gentleman. I owe you, the gratitude I owe you is immense, Mr. Friedman, and it is always an honor to speak to you. God bless you. Thank you so much. Dr. J signing out of Rome Radio, and we'll be back.